Well, it's good to define like when should you stretch because this is a question I get all the time. There's three main areas where you want to stretch within your training week. One is maybe 1 to 2 minutes before the training session.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the Best You podcast. My name is Nick Carrier, body optimization coach and creator of the 10-Week Transformation. The mission of this show is to help you get closer to the best version of yourself so you can live a life of more meaning and impact. In today's episode, we have Dr. John Rusin. John is an industry-leading, world-renowned performance and pain-free training expert who's worked with elite athletes, NFL athletes, and everyday fitness enthusiasts who are looking to train smarter and stay injury-free, most importantly. Today's episode is a blueprint, literally a blueprint for how to build strength without breaking down your body, and how to do exercises like deadlifts, back squats, and bench press, how to do those things safely, and the best way to warm up, and much, much more. He's the expert on not just how to train to look good and perform good, but also to stay injury-free for basically the rest of your life. For now, it's time to get closer to your best you. Let's dive in. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am super excited to be rejoined after, I didn't look it up, maybe a year and a half or so, back to the podcast, Dr. John Rusin. John, I'm super excited about the upcoming release of your book. Your book is releasing October 21st. At the time of this podcast, it's going to be a little bit before the book is actually released, so we'll let you guys know how to pre-order it and everything. It's going to be in the description in the show notes, but this is the most in-depth book on how to it's called Pain-Free Performance, Move Better, Train Smarter, and Build an Unbreakable Body, and that's exactly what it is. It's super in-depth. It's got a bunch of pictures. It's got QR codes where you can go to videos, and it's just super in-depth so that you guys can not only train hard, but train for a long period of time and minimize the likelihood of pain and injury and stuff like that. So really excited to dive into a lot of things. I feel like we're going to get into a lot of different kind of nuanced topics as well, but I kind of want to start high level, because I know as a trainer, both of us have heard a lot of people who maybe don't necessarily know a whole lot about training, or maybe even do know some about training. They'll say things like, and you mentioned this in your book a little bit, like deadlifting is bad for your back. Running, it's bad for your knees. Benching, it's bad for your shoulders. Squatting, it's bad for your hips. Now, if you were to just hear some of that like surface level stuff to somebody who is like telling you in person, and you didn't have a chance to be like, hey, read my 500-page book, how would you kind of reply to them to make it seem like, or make them realize that that's not exactly?
We hear that stereotype every single day, and we have our clients hearing that from people that are in this God's complex, which are the physicians out there, some physical therapists that don't have a movements approach. And I can't not disagree with them to some extent, because there's a reason that the stereotype exists that deadlifting is bad for your back and squatting is bad for your knees and running is going to lay havoc on your entire system, because a vast majority of people are entering a fitness solution which they're not necessarily prepared for. So they go in and they deadlift for the first time, but then they try to max out, go too hard, too heavy, too quickly without the form and the requisite technique. And then all of a sudden we kind of turn into, hey, this exercise is bad for XYZ. And I can kind of understand it, but when you peel back the surface layer a little bit, it is absolute BS, because the things that are the most quote unquote injurious in the gym are most likely the things that we need to rebuild so they can protect us for the long term. Thinking about things like deadlifting, yes, it's going to be the most injurious activity in terms of weight training, but it's also the thing that is the number one movement pattern on earth to protect against all forms of lower back pain and injury. And then you talk about running. Hey, running is the most popular activity on earth, but it can be a huge form of cardiovascular health and fitness moving forward. I think the key is that we need to start moving for our body. We need to have common sense in moving into a fitness solution. And we need to be able to say that our body is different than the person right or left of us. And we need solutions to train specifically for our body and not necessarily worry about anyone else's.
So good. I love that. The couple things I want to reiterate there, I think it's so true that people are entering a fitness solution that they're not really ready for. They're trying to go run when like they might not be able to really balance on one foot or stand on one foot or hop on one foot for very long. They're trying to do a deadlift for, I don't know, 100 pounds when they haven't hit those prerequisite steps necessary in order to be able to do it correctly and in order to have the right strength to be able to do a certain weight. So I think that's so true. And then I think it is pretty ironic that you said some of the exercises that are the most injurious, like meaning most frequently maybe people injure themselves, are also the best for long-term health and bulletproofness, if you will. And so it's important to make sure that you don't just write these things off as they're bad to do, because when done properly and when you set yourself up for success, like, they are super important to do. So, like, let's start with it. Let's just go deadlift then, since that's probably one of the most popular ones that people completely just denounce. What are some things, if somebody's listening right now and they have maybe deadlifted a little bit or not really deadlifted, what are some of like the prerequisite things that they need to know from a strength perspective and maybe a form perspective before kind of diving into doing something like that?
Well, if you've been hurt deadlifting before, if you haven't deadlifted in a while, or you've totally deactivated the hip hinge pattern, which is the movement pattern that houses the deadlift specific exercise, don't just go right back into the peak of the pyramid, the hardest thing that we can do with the maximal loading. What we need to do is just be able to put back the pieces in terms of learning some new motor skills, being able to practice those skills, being able to callous the system under load, and then train specifically for our body and its unique needs. And that means that we have a step-by-step approach to be able to rebuild the hip hinge movement pattern. And this is something that is a non-negotiable inside of pain-free performance, is that we're not Superman. We go, hey, you just hurt your lower back deadlifting, take 6 weeks off, and then just go do exactly the same thing and just hope and pray that you don't hurt yourself again. That is craziness. Instead, we're going to be able to go in and look at maybe the weak link. Where do we need to get stronger? Where do we need to get more skilled? Where do we need to respect the training process or the weights a little bit more? And then we start to go in and refine utilizing our system. That's two different ways. So we have an access point into what's an exercise that you feel confident and competent in today that falls inside of that hip hinge pattern that can train the glutes and the hamstrings and the lower back, and how can we elicit a desired training effect without pain today? There's so many different awesome options for that. But while we're doing that, it's not good enough just to go, hey, we're not going to go back in and actually try to train and evolve the system that did break down on us. We're going to go back in and we're going to identify mobility issues, stability issues, try to learn new motor skills with corrective exercises or maybe activation drills, and have a more long-term strategy of trying to make your system stronger and more resilient so we don't line up with those same lower back irritations or injuries again. And I think that this is a step-by-step approach that is a little bit more sustainable in terms of finding out how you move, what your ideal movement patterns look like, and then giving time its way to be able to strengthen and to be able to put on muscle and be able to just get better at the movement skill itself.
Totally.
Taking away all of the variables of, hey, you need to move uniquely for your body. We just need time to be able to adapt to a stimulus. And adapting to that stimulus is not only, hey, just go in and do the thing lighter. That's the mistake most people make, especially with deadlifting. We need to rebuild the whole thing. And there's many different ways in order to break down that hip hinge to create strong strength and resilience.
Yeah, let's actually just go before moving on. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's important because there's going to be some people who are lifting and they have had back injuries doing deadlifts before, or I've felt pain doing deadlifts before. If you were to go back and give us that sequential approach to kind of relearn the hip hinge, callous the system to gradually more loads and making sure that mobility, maybe those three things, like making sure the mobility is where it needs to be, the movement pattern is trained right, and then you callous the system to bear more load. How would you kind of progressively do that?
Yeah, four-stage approach if you're looking to return to deadlifting stronger and healthier than ever. The first approach is to take a horizontal force vector. What that essentially means is we're going to be doing things like glute bridges, hip thrusts, and band or cable pull-throughs. That allows us to have the hip hinge mechanics be honed. We get to work on mobility, stability, isometrics at the lower back, and it is super spine sparing, meaning that there's very low spine stress, very high muscular stress. That is the place to start. The second place to go from that, step two, is to be able to go in and do something called the Romanian deadlift or Romanian deadlift variations. Essentially, we start at the top out of a neutral position, and then we hinge our hips back with a neutral spine, slight knee bend, and we're able to explore that full and complete range of motion, stretching the hamstrings at the bottom, flexing the glutes at the top, again, being able to make sure that our spine and our pelvis stay in a neutral form. Step three would be, okay, now we feel confident to start moving the load from the ground up into a standing position. I like being able to work over center of mass, meaning that we don't go directly to the barbell. We utilize things like a kettlebell between the feet, a trap bar that places our body on the center of mass, and we're able to actually stand that up again with that hip hinge pattern. The big difference between a Romanian deadlift and then a deadlift off the ground is how we breathe, how we brace, and how we prepare our pillar and our stability to be able to withstand the stress with good technique. So that third step is a really big step in order to brace from the bottom. And then finally, if you do find yourself strong and healthy and feeling really good and confident in it, that's when we move back into some sort of barbell deadlift variation, whether that be pulling off of blocks to increase the range or to decrease the range of motion while increasing the bar height off the ground, whether that be changing the stance, going a little bit wider at the feet and narrower at the arms. There's many different ways to go back into the barbell than just one generic deadlift. But that four-stage process is exactly what we teach in Pain-Free Performance. And when you're patient with it, you get super strong, you get confident, and you forget about any aches, pains, or injuries that have previously happened because you've earned the right to get back to that peak.
Totally. That's the key to it, though, staying patient, right? Because if you're somebody who wants to get back to deadlifting, then the patience is probably going to sometimes wear a little bit thin. But like, if you want to be able to do it and like continue to do it and continue to do it, like build back from the ground up so that you can build the foundation of, like you mentioned, the hip hinge pattern, callousing the system for load, and making sure you're really the technique and setting yourself up in a neutral position and everything like that is set up for success. Next thing I want to go into, and kind of for the next number of minutes, and next maybe a number of subtopics I want to dive into, is the 6-phase warm-up that you always coach. So to kind of zoom out a little bit more, you kind of coach a perfect 60-minute workout, and the first part of that is a 10-minute warm-up that has 6 different phases. Just for the sake of time, I want to kind of hone in on 2 of the phases a little bit more in depth than maybe the other 4. But real quickly, the 6 phases: soft tissue techniques, biphasic positional stretching, corrective exercise, activation drills, movement pattern development, and central nervous system stimulation. I want to go on 2 and 6, the biphasic positional stretching. I want to start with that. First off, basically what that means high level is oscillating in and out of a particular range of motion, and then holding at that end range of motion after a specified period of time, if you will. Why is that oscillation more beneficial than just a hold? Talk to us about the difference between just holding a stretch and oscillating in a stretch.
The body thrives with movement. We know this, but the body thrives with movement even with something like stretching or mobility work, because the more micro movements that we have, the more kinesthetic awareness the body has, meaning that it goes through a learning process on how to unlock some of these ranges of motion, how to manage the tightness of the tonicity of some of the key musculature that we're looking to reduce, and essentially just getting more biofeedback in order for us to be able to unlock some of these key positions. So I am a big fan of efficiency when it comes to any sort of soft tissue work or mobility work or stretching. And I've seen that with biphasic stretching, so oscillating on and off for about 30 seconds, and then sitting on a static end range hold for about 15 or 30 seconds, that can exceed the benefits than holding a stretch for multiple minutes on end in a static position. So it is a two.
And when you say exceed the benefits, do you mean like from the sense of experiential, it's like feeling like you're more loose, feeling like you can access more range of motion? When you say exceed the benefits, what do you mean by that?
It's always objective when it comes to our system. We want to be able to access new, authentic ranges of motion, meaning that we didn't fake the range of motion, we actually got it there. And we want to have functional transference into actually moving our body through space in some sort of foundational movement pattern. So when we unlock a acute range and then we integrate a more complete movement pattern because of the range that we unlocked, that is what we're really looking for in any of the modalities that are used in the 6-phase dynamic warm-up sequence. So it's all to get to that peak, which is you feeling your best so you can go out and perform your best and be pain-free.
Totally. And When we say accessing more range of motion and being able to own that range of motion, how would you explain the benefit from somebody in terms of like if you're transitioning to the workout for a second, if you're actually doing a squat and you go full range of motion rather than accessing 1 inch less range of motion, what's the benefit of more range of motion compared to less?
So, full and complete range of motion is going to be the baseline of your human movement system. So, squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, carry, locomotion patterns, we should be able to work through your complete range of motion. It's going to be individual to the person, their body type, their anthropometry, and their bony structure. But when we unlock full and complete ranges of motion, we're essentially being able to strengthen deeper and further ranges. Where a vast majority of people get hurt is in accessing ranges of motion that they get their bodies into that they can't necessarily have their brain stabilize. So it's this motor control gap theory, is that what we call it in pain-free performance. It's essentially your body gets forced into a position. It's probably never really been in that much, and it absolutely cannot stabilize it. And it's weak in that range. And then boom, that's when pain, injuries, or flare-ups occur. So we want to be able to reduce that motor control gap. We want to close down that gap as low as possible and be able to have a more complete range of motion being strengthened. And this can lead to better hypertrophy benefits. It can lead to, of course, strength benefits. But I think the number one thing that we focus on in actually rebuilding a complete movement system through full range of motion is that we are in our strongest and safest positions always.
Totally. So I want to go into that topic because I wanted to cover it anyway, the motor control gap. So basically there's a difference between flexibility and mobility. Flexibility, to use actually your definition inside of the textbook, flexibility is the range of motion that you can passively access, meaning you can access a position but with limited ability to control the position. In contrast, mobility is the range of motion that you can actively control, meaning you have the coordination and strength to stabilize the position during the movement. Now, some people heard that and were like, I don't really know what they just said. In layman's terms, how would you describe the difference between flexibility and mobility? What's the difference between being able to own range of motion and not own range of motion?
It's all going to be the way in which we can control and stabilize. And using the example of being able to go through a body weight squat. So body weight squat, we're trying to keep the spine and the pelvis in neutral. So we're not just like bending over and having piss poor form, but go down and actually look at your body weight squat. And then notice where your butt is relative to the floor. And then go and grab the wall or grab a staircase or grab something that allows you to take out the motor control, take out the stability component, and then just go down and squat as low as you possibly can. Most likely you're going to get 6, 12 inches, maybe even more of range of motion, and your spine and pelvis still look really good. So what's the difference between body weight squatting through free space and then having a supported squat? It's the way that your brain stabilizes these positions. And it doesn't only happen in isolation, it happens in integration with these movement patterns as well. So essentially, this is what creates that motor control gap. We want to have your body weight squat look as close to possible, or at least within 10 to 15% of a supported squat, or it could be any movement pattern, or it could be any acute range of motion. This is where we tend to own the positions because we can actively stabilize at that end range of motion. And we avoid being pushed into ranges that we really have no access to be able to stabilize.
Totally. So one of the things that I see a lot is if somebody's warming up the adductors, doing like Cossack squats and going side to side like that, shifting side to side. For example, if they don't put their hands on their leg, they don't put their hands on the floor, they own the range of motion that they get to. But if they put their hands on their legs or put the hands on the floor, they get a little bit deeper. That's the passive range of motion because they're using some assistance and they can't quite own that range of motion, right?
That it's along that concept,
Okay.
specific to the Cossack squat or like the lateral lunge, I would call it.
Right.
There's a lot of different rotary components to that as well. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
Right.
But for the concept of motor control gapping, in order to make sure that we're training mobility and not just flexibility, we also have to be keeping sound biomechanics and sound form. So just because you can compensate and just try to find a way to stabilize on your non-contractile tissues hanging out on the joints, so to say, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to stabilize that when you're in active load or you're under active fatigue. So I think that being able to avoid compensation while keeping authentic motions, that's where we can get the most out of some of this more active mobility work or even some of the stretching that we're doing.
Totally. So basically, again, trying to speak about it in simplistic terms. We want to we would like to be flexible, but we want to be able to own as much of the flexibility that we have and have strength as much of the flexibility that we have. And so a lot of people who might be naturally very flexible, but might not be super mobile and have strength through that range of motion are more susceptible to injury than other people, correct?
We see that all the time. A vast majority of people are just going to be like, hey, I'm chronically tight and locked down just from disuse of these ranges of motion, or they're just doing nothing to really actively open up their mobility. But then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you see some of the most chronically injured people out there are people with hypermobility syndrome or different areas that have hypermobility ranges of motion in terms of their flexibility accessible. So
Right.
they have the biggest motor control gaps. They have the biggest gaps where they're the most vulnerable to being able to be injured or flared up in those areas.
Totally. Totally. So to stay on the flexibility topic one more time, um, I think that it's important for people to understand and for you to distinguish the difference between flexibility in terms of like stretching before a workout versus flexibility to actually gain flexibility. Talk about the difference between those two ideas.
Well, it's good to define like when should you stretch because this is a question I get all the time. There's three main areas where you want to stretch within your training week. One is maybe 1 to 2 minutes before the training session. That happens in phase two of the six-phase dynamic warm-up. You have a 3 to 5 minute window of a post-training cool down, which is more static stretching, long duration holds that can help with recoverability. And then if you want to work on things above and beyond that, like 60 or 70 minute training session, then there's no real disadvantage of going in and doing some stretching and mobility work while you're Netflixing and chilling or on your off days, just working on trying to open up your brain's ability to reduce tonicity and be able to just be more comfortable in these extended ranges of motion. So before training, 1 to 2 minutes, after training, 3 to 5 minutes, and then go nuts if you want to do it on your off days or at night. I think that people need more mobility work in their life, not less.
Totally. And I think it was fascinating for me, and so I think it might be fascinating for other people. And I might let you dive a little bit deeper into it, but I'm quoting your book a little bit here. So like before the workout, when you're stretching, you're kind of trying to fool your nervous system into reducing you keep using the word tonicity, which is basically tightness. So you're trying to reduce that tightness to just like kind of momentarily during that workout, overcome basically the body's nervous system trying to protect itself. Dive a little bit more deeper into that and try to describe what the purpose of the pre-stretching is, using a little bit of that language for people to make it clear.
Yeah, many times people will come into their workouts, especially within the first couple minutes, and they feel like they're driving their car with the parking brakes still on. And they're
Yeah.
like, why the hell aren't I feeling good? Why can't I get to the bottom end of my range of motion on squats? Why do my knees hurt? Well, essentially, you're driving your car through the parking brake and you're just fucking up those tires and your brakes.
Yeah.
And they don't realize this. So, a quick and easy way to do this is going through oscillation stretching. And a lot of people have been told to avoid stretching in the warm up because there are these zombie lie studies from 35 plus years ago where
Yeah.
they put people into like a medieval contraption device, stretch their hip flexors like against their will, and then had them do vertical jump. And like they did this for 1, 3, and 5 minutes. It's like, yeah, no shit. If you're in pain for 5 straight minutes and somebody's stretching you, you're not going to be jumping very much. But the study was one that was like, it was like one of these things that, oh, never stretch again because it reduces quote unquote power output. It's like, who gives a shit? It wasn't even statistically significant. And we're talking about this 35 plus years later. What I've seen is that if we can just unlock that parking brake on the movement system, we're able to explore better ranges of motion and just more fluidity in motion. We are allowed to be able to move at our top performance, which then yields optimal performance no matter the characteristic that's trained. But I think that that's one that we've been told that I think we should forget about because, again, if you keep your mind on 1 to 2 minutes of heavy, focused, invested, movement based stretching, you're going to far exceed the performance if you hadn't already done that. And then if you can put it into a phasic system like the 6 phase, it just allows you to then couple some of the benefits to get you to the point where you're feeling really awesome before you train.
Okay, I'm going to jump to the last part of the 6 phases for the sake of time, and that's central nervous system stimulation. I think this is something I know that I didn't know really too much about this before actually getting certified through your course a couple of years ago. And I know that it's transformed my training and how I feel like going into a session. It's kind of like one of those things where when you've kind of first begin your warm-up, you're kind of tired, and then by the time you finish, you're like, let's freaking go into this first set. I'm jacked up. So what is the purpose of central nervous system stimulation? And give us maybe high-level overview of what that means if somebody who's never maybe heard of central nervous system, and what's the purpose of it?
Think about it as being like Superman before you go into your workouts and be able to amplify your performance very, very quickly. The key determinant is not always just the muscles in your body or even the movement patterns in your body. It's this thing right in your head that is able to unlock key performances in terms of potentiation. What potentiation essentially means is that you are going to over and outperform what you had done by training two different ways. You can potentiate your brain to overperform by going super heavy in terms of load, or you can go super fast in terms of speed. Either one of those has a direct transference into outperforming athletic endeavors, heavy loading, and then even breaking through fatigue. So we're essentially just trying to train the nervous system with the last thing that we do in the warm-up in order for us to feel our best. And like you alluded to, Nick, when you get done with doing 2 to 3 minutes of central nervous system prep or stimulation, you are feeling awesome. You are feeling ready to go. You've forgotten about those aches and pains because you've already addressed those. And really, you're ready to perform. And that's what pain-free performance actually means. You go from maybe having ache, pain, or injury all the way through a 10-minute prep, and all of a sudden you went from pain-free to performance, and you're ready to train. Because doesn't it feel good being able to be at your best when you want to be at your best? That is the goal of that. But really, it's a phenomenon called post-activation potentiation. That's super dork term. Yeah. But what it means is that we are over exceeding our physical performances by fooling the brain to outperform them.
So basically, like you said, that post-activation potentiation, it's a way to trick your brain to overperform what you've done in the past. And you can do that by this one is mainly super speed, mainly doing something like 5 quick jumping jacks, a couple quick jump squats or vertical jumps, seal jacks, med ball passes, med ball throws, that sort of thing to just like jack up your system. Or potentially you could do it in a way of like going, maybe like trying to go heavier but assisted than you normally would do. How would you do it if in a heavy manner?
We wouldn't do it in a heavy manner because we have to remember this is still the warm-up.
Right. I guess like if we were talking about outside of a warm-up.
Yeah, so outside of the warm-up, it's called contrast training. So contrast training, you would train something fast and something heavy. And you can actually go both ways on it. So you can go train it fast, wait for your heart rate to come down, and then go super heavy, and you're going to have an optimal performance. Or you could go super heavy directly into a more ballistic fast motion and be faster there on out. The thing with tricking your brain in this way is like a little bit goes a long way. Like when you're feeling like ready to run through a brick wall because you're feeling so awesome, we need to know that we need to like sprinkle this stuff in because it is a very potent training modality. So anytime that we're using some of these central nervous system stimulation techniques, like a little bit goes a long way. In phase 6 of the warm-up, we're thinking about maybe a couple minutes there. We don't want to exceed 20, 25 total reps. And even if you're going into contrast training with some of the bigger lifts of the day, usually we're not exceeding like 3 or 4 different set bouts of that type of thing. Because again, like that's only a portion of what really matters in a holistic and a well-rounded training program or training day. And we just need to make sure that we have a little bit of brain power to still move on into things that train some other aspects of our physicality.
Totally. So that contrast training, if you were actually to put that into play, let's say you were trying to get as high of a vertical jump as you could, or as heavy of a deadlift as you could, to kind of maybe use two opposites. If you were trying to go as heavy deadlift as you could, maybe you could do a couple of vertical jumps, rest for a few seconds, and then go into a deadlift, or vice versa, to like help perform maybe at our best?
Yeah, this is exactly the way I design a majority of the programs inside of Pain Free Performance's book. So we have things called primer sets. So after the 6 phase warm up, that should take about 10 minutes. You go into this intermediary phase between the warm up and then your big heavy lift of the day. And this is what we would call a primer. A primer can be something that is more power based, more athletic based, more ballistic based. And this essentially gets us to continue what the benefits were from phase 6 of the warm up all the way into a little bit more direction. The big difference between phase 6 of the warm up is going to be very light load and it's going to be mostly body weight dependent. And then we're going to move into a primer that we can start mixing and matching loads. It's still going to be relatively light loads, but all of a sudden we can start using things like landmines and kettlebells and med balls and things that we can start to maximize force output with. When you're starting to maximize force output and you're still training on that force velocity curve towards more speed and more velocity, that is what is going to set you up for being totally amplified when you go into that big lift of the day. So say you have a deadlift, most likely it's going to be a horizontal based movement that we're going to be doing in our primer. It's going to be a horizontal based jump probably in phase 6. And then we're going to line that all the way up to our big key performance indicator, which is going to be that top end set of the compound pattern that you want to train hard and heavy that day. And it's most likely the one that you're going to be looking at improving and having a progressive overload effect over time.
Yeah, totally. Love it. One note in terms of like if you were trying to go really heavy, if you were trying to maybe hit a 1 rep max or a 2 reps or 3 reps or 4 reps or something that's very top end strength oriented. There's a number of different sections of breathing techniques in the book, which I loved. However, I don't want to, again, spend too much time on all of them. I want to spend just the time on one that might help to improve that 1 rep, 2 reps, or 3 reps or whatever, the sympathetic huff breath. So if somebody is getting ready to step under a back squat or getting ready to go for a deadlift, what might that look like to help perform your best in terms of the breathing technique?
I knew exactly where you're going with this one because this is my favorite breathing technique because this one, again, makes you feel super awesome. Again, very similar to the potentiation effects. The sympathetic huff breath is something that you want to do maybe like 1 time per workout, maybe like 3 or 4 times per week, because you're going to feel like the friggin' Hulk when you get under the bar or over the bar for that effect. Essentially, what we want to do is be able to take our breath and be able to exhale against resistance while also engaging some of our secondary and tertiary breathing muscles. So we're thinking about a lot in the neck, a lot in the traps, and even some in the pecs, like the pectoralis minor. So these things, especially going elevation to depression while blowing out, and you do 2 or 3 quick sympathetic huff breaths, that will tap into our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response, exactly where you want to be before going in and actually getting that heavy lift done. This isn't something that you need to build up from 135 to 225 to 315 to 405 and then go at 495 having used that technique 5 different times.
Right.
But if it's that last 500-pound deadlift, boom, you throw this thing in on. It's the equivalent of being slapped in the back by your gym bro without the bruises on your traps.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Because he's going through his headphones, you couldn't quite hear the exhale. But if I'll do it real quick, I think it's, and then you get ready and you freaking attack. That's. Oh, great. Whatever. Who cares? Well, yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. If you're watching, you saw it. So, that's great. That's great. I love it. I love it. So I think the next thing I want to get into is just maybe asking a few specifics for people who, just like practical takeaways going into a day where they're getting ready to do maybe back squats or getting ready to do deadlifts or getting ready to do bench press. So let's take them one at a time in terms of specific exercises. I know it's going to be body dependent and like what's tight on each person and all of those sorts of things. And so we're trying to give a general blueprint for something that is not super general, but do the best you can in terms of like, what are maybe some of the best warm-up exercises? And again, like for the in terms of saving some time, not for like all 6 phases, maybe a couple of phases. Best warm-up exercises before going into a day with back squats. Let's start there.
Back squats, let's take away the exercises and look at the focus of the
Okay.
goals of why you'd be doing the warm up and maybe the primer. In
Cool.
terms of the warm up, most people just need to unlock their hips, most specifically their hip flexors. In order to stabilize, especially the bottom of a back squat, we need to be able to have dynamic stability of those hip flexors being able to contract and then relax in a way that allows us to maintain proper spinal stability and lumbopelvic stability, again, at the bottom of that squat. So we're going at foam rolling of the quads and the hip flexors, biphasic stretching of the quads and the hip flexors, a corrective exercise that has hip extension, an activation drill that has a hip extension like a hip thrust, and then practicing the squat, and then going into some sort of vertical jump. And then in terms of being able to make sure that you're feeling the best for that back squat, I'm a big fan of being able to, again, prime the vertical jump, but also if you want to make your knees and your hips feel awesome, going through things like different variations of hamstring curls before squatting. Be able to pump the blood right into the hamstrings, into the backs of the knees, into the backs of the hips, and we're able to essentially prime the joints with synovial fluid. We're able to prime the muscles with blood flow, and we're able to really activate those key stabilizers like the hamstrings on the backside of the squat. So that's exactly the focus that I would generally do for a majority of my programs.
I love it. That's great. That's great. What's different in terms of if we're doing a day for deadlifts?
Deadlifts would be a little bit different because it's a hip hinge pattern versus a bilateral squat pattern. The hip hinge pattern is a little bit different because there's a huge amount of stability that we need that goes from the lower back down into the hips, and especially at the glutes and at the abductors. So this is kind of like the posterolateral, the backside, and then the anteromedial, which is kind of the front side. So we tend to go directly at the adductors in this case. So foam roll the adductors, biphasic stretch the adductors, do some sort of corrective exercise that puts the adductors at length so we can, again, work on that motor control and that motor gap that we want to work on. And then in terms of being able to activate, we're looking at glutes, train the pattern, we're looking at RDLs, and then having horizontal jumping or horizontal ballistic motions, moving your body through space back to forward. And then in terms of priming the glutes before deadlift day, it's one of the best things that you can do for long-term lower back health and actually just getting a stronger and more stable posterior chain. Big fan of hip thrusts and glute bridges and anything that, again, gets our hips into extension with a heavy glute squeeze that has hamstrings, glutes, and lower back involved. So hip thrust is probably the one that people are most familiar with. We'd be training that before we go into that deadlift.
Great. Great. This is awesome. All right, let's do bench press to finish off this little segment here.
Bench press is going to be one of the toughest ones for people because they are stuck like we are stuck right now, sitting, doing podcasts, working on the phone or the computer, driving. And we just need to reverse that posture before we get into actually going under heavy loads with the barbell. So we tend to have a little bit more anterior mobility focus with bench press days. So we'll be doing soft tissue work on the pecs and the chest. We'll be stretching that same area. And then when it comes to corrective exercise, I really like getting in the mid back and thoracic spine to be able to rotate and extend it. Same thing with activation drills of the upper back, plus that thoracic spine opening up, and then being able to train push-ups in phase 5, and then some sort of ballistic horizontal push in phase 6, something like a plyo push-up. And then working on the priming mechanism, we go into utilizing things that drive blood flow into the posterior aspect, the back sides of those shoulders. Face pulls are an undefeated champion before bench press day. Being able to train face pulls is the perfect movement to reverse poor sedentary daily posture. And it essentially gets us into extension, external rotation, and abduction, which is exactly the opposite of what you're doing while you're texting on your cell phone.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was actually literally before my workout this morning, I pulled up your Instagram page and I was doing plyo push-ups and face pulls before I went into bench press back and forth because of it. And I was jacked up before going into my first set. So I was ready to roll. This is kind of a little bit of a random aside or a different topic, but I think it's fascinating because I didn't, again, really know about this until I did y'all's certification a couple of years ago. The importance or the relevance of knowing the length of your tibia versus your femur and how that impacts certain exercises like lunges, squats, and deadlifts. So tibia being basically your lower leg, kind of from your knee to your ankle for the most part, and then your femur being kind of your knee to your hip, and how the length of those different aspects of your legs can impact those different movement patterns. Give us an overview of how it impacts those movement patterns.
Well, I give you a pass because this is actually something brand new in the Pain Free Performance book that I had adopted over the last number of years that we weren't necessarily teaching in all the certification courses that we run. But the big question that we always got was like, where should my knee go when I'm doing single leg work or even when I'm doing bilateral work? Should I do knees over toes like I've heard that is so good for your knees? Or should I act like it's 1995 at Westside Barbell and have the shins stacked in vertical angulation? So we got this question time and time again, and I didn't address it until this book. But what you're essentially talking about here is something called the TF ratio. It's the tibial femoral ratio. So when we think about this, we have different lengths of our thigh bone versus our shin bone. And those different lengths of that is going to dictate basically where your knee needs to be relative to your toes to be able to be in a strong and stable position. You know, everyone's body is different. And I think that needs to be a core appreciation for everyone, no matter what your training goal is, no matter what your injury history is, no matter how old you are. Your unique body and things like the TF ratio, it is going to be unique to you because your reverse lunge is going to be totally different than mine. And that's okay. They don't need to look the same. But in terms of the principles, we need to be able to be training based on some of these non-changeable structures. Like unless you go in for like a total knee replacement or a total hip replacement, we're not really changing the structure of your bony prominences. But in this, if you have a longer femur relative to your tibia, you're going to have a more natural knees forward angle. I would be a really great example of that. Anytime that you see me do single leg work, my knee is over my toes and I'm still feeling everything in my glutes. It's because of the ratio, not because of the muscular targeting. On the opposite side, if you have a shorter thigh versus shin, then you're going to have a more vertical tibial angle when it comes to your shin position. And what we're looking at is the upchain effects of this. So how does your knee position, how does that dictate how much strength and stability we have at the hip and also at the lumbar and lumbopelvic complex? So we want to be strong and stable centrally. So if we can get the knee positioning right based on our specific angles, then we can be strong at the hip and then we can be locked in at the core. And that is going to lead to strength and stability and really nice strength outputs.
So it's funny, the reason why this sticks so vividly in my brain and why I'm fascinated by it is at the certification course. We were talking about deadlifts and I asked a question and the person teaching the class was like, I guess you've probably never been very good at deadlifts, have you? And I was like, the hell is that supposed to mean? And he's like, well, you have a long femur. You have longer femurs, so you're probably pretty fast. And I was like, well, I appreciate the compliment then, but and yeah, exactly. But anyway, so you kind of mentioned how it might vary for people when it comes to like a single leg move in terms of the knee being forward more over the toe or being stacked more vertically on top of the ankle. How does it impact squat? Does it impact people's range of motion? Should it impact whether people elevate their heels? How does it impact deadlift? If somebody has longer femurs, should they maybe have more of do deadlifts off of a rack, an elevated surface? Talk to us about squats and deadlifts and how it might impact people's execution of those moves.
Let's go one at a time here.
Okay.
So the key thing that we're going to focus on in terms of body typing and anthropometry, which is your joint types in the squat, is going to be the angle of the femoral head and the shape and the size of that acetabular ball and socket. That is going to be a key dictator. When you have a ball and socket joint, you have maximal degrees of freedom, so you can go a lot of different directions. So as much as this is like counterintuitive, the length of your femur versus the length of your tibia, is not as impactful in the bilateral squat as it would be in single leg work.
Mm,
The same thing could be said with the hip hinge pattern as well, because it is a hip hinge, it is hip dominant. The
yep.
hip is going to be the big dictator of where we go in terms of angulation. Uh, the shape and the size of the hip is going to dictate our stance, our toe out, our toe in position, our width. And then also when you're deadlifting, we have to take into account other anthropometrical variables like, hey, how long is your torso? Do you have super long arms or do you have short arms? There's
Yeah.
just so much more in play. But specific to the single leg pattern, we tend to focus in on that TF ratio because it's far different than the squat or the hinge bilaterally. When we're talking about single leg patterning, because we're on an asymmetrical lower body stance, it actually changes the game away from the bilateral counterparts. And essentially, it is its own pattern in itself. A lot of people don't understand that when you split your stance, biomechanics totally change. It's no longer a squat or a hinge. You can kind of make it a squatty single leg pattern or a hingy
Right.
single leg pattern. But if you want to be the strongest and the most stable, and dare I say, get into the most athletic position possible, you want to maximize the amount of authentic knee forward position that you have based on that ratio we were talking about. And then you also want to be able to utilize full hip flexion as well, with your torso actually coming forward. So you want to combine the elements of a hip hinge at the hip, and you want to combine the elements of a squat at the knee to be able to get full knee flexion, full hip flexion, and that is going to recruit the maximal amount of musculature. It's going to put our spine, our hip, and our knee into centrated positions to be strong and stable. And that is going to elicit the best force output and the best strength gains that we could possibly make. And then this natural position is what we find ourselves in some of the most popular exercises on earth in terms of functional training. Bulgarian split squats, knee forward plus hip hinge. Trap bar deadlift, knee forward plus hip hinge. Sprinting, knee forward plus hip hinge. Pushing the sled, knee forward plus hip hinge. Lateral lunge, knee forward plus hip hinge.
Yep.
So these things that are more naturally athletic, it puts us in a more ball out of our foot dominant ground contact point, and it allows us to just be strong and stable. And it's because we have split that stance. It's a totally different ball game when you look at the athleticism and the natural movement abilities in a split stance at the lower body versus being locked into the bilaterals.
Gotcha. To stay a little bit on lower body, I'm interested in terms of, and again, it's very particular to person by person, but I'm gonna maybe ask like how you personally think about maybe programming it for yourself. Let's say you're doing lower body, I don't know, a couple times, like 2 different days during the week, you're hitting some lower body muscles. How do you think about splitting up the volume of work? Do you think about it from the muscle groups of like quads, glutes, hamstrings, adductors, the different kinds of glute med, glute max? Do you think about the movement patterns of squat, hinge, lunge? Like, how do you think about programming your lower body work over the course of a week to make sure you have the appropriate ratios of hitting the different muscle groups and different movement patterns?
Yeah, here's a cheat code for everyone listening in. You do not need to worry about particular muscle groups. Isolating muscle groups is not how the human movement system works. We move in integration of movement patterns. And if you can integrate and you can program the movement patterns accordingly, you automatically get all of the stimulus that you need on every single muscle group itself. So when you're looking at lower body days, we only have 3 options. We have a hinge option, we have a squat option, and we have a lunge option, which is your single leg work. And we try to make sure that we have a frequency of at least 2 times per week of exposure to all of those patterns. So if you're going to be doing something like a 4-day upper lower split, you want to be squat hinging and lunging on every single one of those lower body days. But it doesn't mean that's only what you have to do. You can also break down it to the component of its parts. We tend to use a lot more isolation work and breaking away from those big 3 lower body patterns at the glutes with direct training, the hamstrings at direct training, the lower leg, the gastrocs, the soleus, the calves at training, and then we also hit the adductors directly as well. So I think that as long as we have a 2 time per week frequency at squat, hinge, lunge, and then we can distribute more posterior chain emphasis for some of the accessory work, then you're going to have a really well-rounded plan. And if you have those 2 lower body days per week, you shouldn't just be doing like squat, bench, and dead and then squat, bench, and dead, even though you're benching on your lower body days, which makes no sense, which a lot of
Yeah.
people do. We need to be looking at like one big, hard, heavy lift in those lower body sessions. So the way that I would break it down is I would pick one per session. Maybe that's a single leg Bulgarian split squat. That is your key performance indicator of the day. And then you train the other patterns in accessory or in priming. Or you train, boom, a back squat as your key performance indicator. Then you're training your single leg and your hip hinge in accessory or priming. And then the last one would be like, hey, you have a deadlift KPI of the day. Then you train single leg and bilateral squat in your accessories or your primers. And then you can feed in some of that isolation work in there as well to make sure everything feels good and make sure you're working on your weak links. But what we shouldn't be doing is just like training every exercise the same in the same sets, in the same reps, and acting like everything is just strength and hypertrophy. There's far more to training for health and longevity than just building maximal amount of muscle or maximal amount of strength. Again, we just want to be well-rounded with things.
Totally. Try to think of the couple. There's a few more topics I want to hit in the limited time that we got left. Let's go with this one. Sticking on like lower body, the deadlift, to kind of go back to focusing on that exercise a little bit. There's a lot of people who, and we might have already answered the question, who feel like they're doing the right form and actually look like they're doing the right form, but for whatever reason, they're still always mainly feeling it in their lower back. Are there people who just are structurally built in a way where it's much more difficult to avoid kind of pains in lower back? Are there types of injuries that are lingering over the years where like they're always just going to have pain in their lower back? And then maybe the third option is like, maybe you just need to go back to the foundations that we talked about earlier and kind of rebuild it from scratch.
There's nothing normal about deadlifting and then that day or the next day being like, man, my lower back is killing me. That means that you're not engaging the actual key musculature that are prime movers that we're targeting. When you're deadlifting, yes, the lower back is going to be active, but I hope that your hamstrings and your glutes and some of your lower leg musculature are more active than the lower back. So I tend to see that this type of client avatar is running into two key problems. They are choosing an exercise that is simply a mismatch for their unique body type, their skill, their shapes, their sizes, or they are not doing the foundations of movement prep correctly. And I'm not talking about the 6-phase dynamic warm-up here. I'm talking about what we break down in section 1 of the Pain-Free Performance book is, hey, I have a movement mastery mindset. I'm trying to master this movement. So up here, I'm locked in. I'm going to be able to breathe and I'm going to be able to brace. Usually it's the bracing. They go, just because my core is tight, I'm going to protect my lower back. I can almost guarantee every single person that I consult with that has this problem, they haven't connected their shoulders to their core. They haven't connected their hips to their core. And they certainly don't have this triad of stability, which is shoulders, hips, core together to create a strong and robust pillar complex. If you're doing that, it's going to be a very clear inclination that you're in the wrong exercise. If you, again, are having a pump happening at the lower back while deadlifting, if you're feeling instability after a deadlift day, it means that most likely we need to be able to create more tension at the central pillar, or we just need better exercise selection. Because again, there's no rule that says that everyone should be able to barbell deadlift off the ground. I have a vast majority of my clients are using different derivatives of deadlifts like trap bar, high and low handle, like hybrid stance deadlifts, rack pulls, pin pulls, a lot of different ways to go in and get the stimulus from the quote unquote deadlift because we're training the hip hinge pattern hard and heavy.
That's great. That's great. To transition to a little bit of the perfect 60-minute workout explanation / kind of like, I want to also get your take on, I actually don't know if there was something like this in the book, but like the perfect, I know there wasn't, but there's like, so in the book, there's great recommendations where if you work out 1 time a week, here's how you break it down. 2 times a week, here's how you break it down. 3, 4, 5, and then 6 to 7 days, here's how you break it down. In terms of building out your weekly plan,
I know what you're asking. How do you figure out what kind of program to train on based on what you have at your disposal? Like
I guess so.
I get this question all the time. It's like, hey, how many times per week do I need to train if my goal is to build muscle? How many times a week do I need to train in order to lose fat?
There you go.
And I respectfully say, well, what does your schedule look like? I'm not talking about like your theoretical schedule. I'm talking about your real life schedule and what can you 110% commit to.
Mm,
That's the starting point for how we can program. Because the news flash is for people, we can build muscle at any frequency per week. We can lose fat at any frequency per week. We can get strong at any frequency per week. We can also get healthy at almost any frequency per week. But what it breaks down to is really 2 times per week is, at least in my mind, the bare minimum in order
yeah.
to make notable gains moving forward, no matter what your goal set is. But that's going to be full body training, and we're going to try to hit all 6 foundational movement patterns each and every one of those 2 sessions. Three
Mm,
days per week is a huge advantage. It's not only 33% more exposure in terms of time, but it's actually about 50% more exposure in terms of the volumes and the diversity that we can get into in terms of distributing those movement patterns. At 3 days a week, we're still full body. From 3 to 4, that's where we make a big shift. Four
yeah.
days per week, we can go into a more concentrated upper lower split. And I think that works really well for people because they can train squat, hinge, lunge 2 days and then push, pull, and carry on the other 2 days. And the recoverability from actually splitting your session
Totally.
up like that, the rest days become a lot more effective because you're not blasting your entire body, which is really wreaks havoc on the brain, not only the body. It allows us to have more volume driven with less fatigue. And then above
Totally.
and beyond that, like I give options for a movement pattern split, which would be going squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull specific days. But that's honestly not one that I recommend a whole lot. If somebody's training 4 days per week, and they have another 2 days that they want to train, or even 3 days that they want to train, we start focusing in on recovery. We start focusing on conditioning, mobility, cardiovascular fitness, and trying to have the yin to the yang of strength and conditioning kind of coming together.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So, no, that was perfect. And I appreciate you kind of covering my ass there when I couldn't come up with the actual question. But yeah, so the 60-minute workout explanation, basically, I'm not going to go through the timestamps, but it's basically a dynamic warm up, primer movements, the key performance lifts, accessory hypertrophy, conditioning finisher, and the cool down. And I wanted to overlay this on your like 6 training tenets, like their strength, power, hypertrophy, conditioning, athleticism, and mobility. And so basically, the perfect 60-minute workout kind of includes all 6 of those training tenets. And so like if each workout is well rounded, it doesn't necessarily have to be like where there's one conditioning day or there's one strength focused day or something like that. Like you can actually get all of them in every 60-minute workout that you do.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And this is something that is not a popular take on programming, but working with enough clients from like diverse backgrounds, they only have so much time to get everything in that they want to achieve in a week. And being able to have a true hybridized training program or training day is the key. So, like your warm up should all be about mobility and prehab and a little bit of athleticism. Priming should be about hypertrophy, athleticism, and power. Key performance indicators are
Yeah.
about strength. We move on to accessories, which is hypertrophy and a little bit of conditioning. The finisher is conditioning, if not cardio. And then the cool down is going to be, again, mobility and prehab. So we can get all 6 in a single 60-minute training session, but we do need to be a lot more cognizant of the way we program and the way we blend this sequence together. That is one of the biggest advantages of Pain-Free Performance as a brand, but also this book resource is that I've done it all for people. 60 weeks of progressive programming and cool downs and warm ups and linchpin blueprints. Like it is the ultimate programming resource because it is one of the hardest things to do in our industry today. I have great coaches that I mentor today that have been in the industry 10 or 15 years and they still struggle with programming. But
Yeah.
one of the shining stars on the way that Pain-Free Performance has been super successful, and I've been successful with my clients, is that we have this true, well-rounded, hybridized training plan that essentially gives us stimulus to all the characteristics that we need for health, performance, and longevity. And it doesn't need to be 7 days per week, 2 hours per day. We can get this in a couple days per week at 60 minutes, and you are doing everything possible to put yourself in the best possible position.
Totally. I love it. And I think that it's like you said, it's the ultimate like hybridized approach in the sense where like if you're training to run a marathon, this is not what you're doing. If you're doing if you're maybe training for like a strongman competition, this isn't necessarily the exact thing that you're doing, but like this is what you should always come back to when you're like maybe not training for something super, super specific.
Interestingly enough, so the two examples that you gave,
Yeah.
marathon running and strongman competition, I have athletes from both of those sport endeavors currently on my client list.
Yeah.
And what we do is we take anywhere from 8 to 10 months of their off season, and we do use a training schedule like this to make
Right.
sure that they're healthy, to make sure that they're well rounded, and we're
Totally.
addressing weak links. Maybe we re emphasize the thing that they weren't getting in their sport and we de emphasize the sport characteristic. But
Right.
when it gets into their preseason, which is usually 2 to 3 months, that's when we re emphasize what we need to go in and do. And then in
Mm.
season work is usually 1 to 2 months. Hopefully, you're not competing all year if you're a marathon runner or a
Yeah.
strongman person. But that's when we go, hey, now we're just going to go straight into sport specificity. But the off seasons are where all the gains are made in terms of
Yeah.
health and optimizing performance. It's about getting them healthy enough in that off season with a well-rounded approach so they can go in and be their best. Because anyone who is, marathon running or strongman or powerlifting or bodybuilding, the name of the game is being healthy. If
Yeah.
you're healthy, you are capable of doing anything when you get into preseason or when you get into competition. If you're feeling like shit, you're broken down, you're injured, I can guarantee you're not going to perform at your best.
Totally. Totally. I mean, they always say the best ability is availability for sure. And so you want to be able to be around. This has been absolutely phenomenal. Y'all, this has been a masterclass, and his book is even a deeper dive in masterclass. And so many people are worried that when they go to the gym, I don't exactly know what to do. Or if they know an exercise name, but I don't exactly know what I should be feeling. I don't exactly know what it should look like. I don't exactly know what it should feel like. This book has great pictures, great in-depth descriptions, QR codes where you can scan it and actually get the video to watch it. That's going to be an absolute game changer for you. So allow you to go to the gym with absolute confidence and do the exercise without absolute confidence that you're doing it correctly and getting the most out of it and getting the bang for your buck. So, mate, we'll have everything linked in the show notes. If you want to pre-order it, you can go to becomeunbreakable.com/book bonus, and you'll be able to receive some exclusive bonuses as well. We'll have the training app down below in the show notes as well. His website, his Instagram is at Dr. John Rusin, which is awesome. I personally go there almost on a weekly basis to see what workouts he's doing and what specific parts of the warm-up and stuff like that, what he's combining together. It's so great. This has been a blast. Anything else you want to finish with or share, John?
No, I appreciate the support and thanks for having me on the show again. And hopefully, people enjoy a lot of these different resources. It's there for you, and that's the reason that they were created. So people can go in and just have the tools to move their body, be pain free, and be healthy for life.
Totally. Totally. Y'all, this is more in depth than anything you'll get and more detailed, and therefore providing you the most confidence than anything you'll get. So I hope you take advantage of it. So follow him on Instagram at Dr. John Rusin. Make sure you grab a copy of the book. If you're listening on the Apple Podcasts app or on Spotify, hit the follow button. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button down below. Other than that, John, appreciate you, man. Appreciate the time, and keep crushing it, brother.
Thanks, man.